What's up, guys? We're here with Dr. Marc Morris, the handsome and talented guy who's been taking care of my nutrition over the last little while. We get a lot of questions, or I've been getting an increasing amount of questions maybe, about my nutrition and what I do to be as thick with 3 C's as I am. And a lot of that's due to this guy right here. So Marc, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what are your credentials, etc.
Absolutely. I've been involved in, there's like a practical and an academic side to me. I've been involved in strength sports for the last 10 plus years, competing and coaching. But in an academic sense, I finished my PhD in nutrition in 2015, and have been studying more or less how we influence our body composition and performance through nutrition. So I like to be quite involved on the practical side of things, so I work with clients and athletes like yourself, and that's what I've been doing for the last 3 to 5 years full time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have Marc here. What we're going to do today is I'd like to talk a little bit about some popular diets and maybe some ways that they're beneficial and some ways that people maybe take them to the extreme and start to get away from influencing their health and performance positively. Yeah. So the first one of those, and this is a really big sort of hot topic lately, is ketogenic diets. Can you maybe give us a rundown of ketogenic diets and then sort of a pros cons kind of scenario?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing with the ketogenic diet is you are abstaining from carbohydrates to put yourself in ketosis, which I mean would be defined by like a level of ketones in your blood, and you're using those as an energy source as opposed to carbohydrates, right? In our setting, and I think the biggest misconception with strength sports in general is that we think they happen quickly and fast, and therefore we use some of those quicker metabolic pathways, and therefore we don't require as much carbohydrates. But as you know, like specifically what you've been doing lately with tempo work and stuff, time under tension, you're doing like a lot of work. Yeah. Sometimes those sets extend for a longer period of time. You're doing multiple sets, right?
I think I did about 45 seconds of overhead pressing in one day.
Absolutely.
Per set, yeah.
We're typically using a lot more carbohydrate as fuel than we would think in terms of a textbook definition.
Okay.
In that sense, carbohydrates are going to be the best performance nutrient we can get in the short term. Dietary fat just isn't going to be used as much. So in that sense, we definitely shouldn't abstain from it, specifically to the extent of ketogenic diets, right? And I think ketogenic diets have their place in terms of some actual health conditions, but as performance-based diet, there isn't enough good literature surrounding them. Okay. And it's also just tough to adhere to for a certain period of time, right? So
what would you say are some of the situations or scenarios where somebody should maybe look into a ketogenic diet?
I think if you should be doing it, you have been informed by a medical professional that you already should be doing it. Yeah, absolutely. It's like to that extent. I don't know a lot about it, but I think like epileptics will go on a ketogenic diet, which I'm assuming most of them aren't strength athletes.
Right.
Yeah, so no, in most cases, you don't need to be doing it. But what I think a lot of people miss is that fad diets like typically will demonize one specific thing, right? So in this case, it's carbohydrates, when really we can make we can improve our performance and our body composition by finding some room in the middle, and that's what a lot of people will miss, right? They like the extremes, they hang out there towards the outsides, right? I think one of the only things I would say is potential good attribute, something like that, is that those fad diets will increase adherence to a diet in some situations when you can stick to it.
Because there's sort of like a zealous buy-in almost.
Right, so the people that are doing it and are sticking to it are using that as a way to stay adherent, and those core principles of what make any diet actually beneficial, or the overlying principles is, calorie control, calorie balance, improving optimal levels of macronutrients. So if that happens and the diet is successful, then I'd say stick with it, right? But outside of that, most people can find ways to make progress a little more realistically.
Okay. And you touched on something here that kind of brings us to our next point, and that's sort of demonizing an aspect of nutrition for the sake of a fad diet, right?
Yep.
And something that's been cropping up a lot lately as well is the vertical diet. And I would say, from my limited knowledge and scope and perspective, that it sort of demonizes like selection of foods.
Right.
So it's very, very structured in like you eat only these couple of things, and that's it. So can you tell us a bit about the vertical diet and your sort of interpretation of its merits or otherwise?
You know what, as we talked about it earlier, I don't know all that much about the actual proponents of it,
Okay.
but I will talk to the fact that when we start to limit food selection, people will be more adherent because it's easier and more laid out. So for
Right.
some people, that works really well for them. So that is totally cool. I think the idea is that in a lot of cases, you're eating an increased amount of red meat, which is gonna have a lot of micronutrients specifically for people that haven't been consuming meat. And I mean, we're in resistance training, we're heavy sweaters, and
Yeah.
a lot of times
Heavy
we'll come with
sweaters there, doesn't it?
we'll come with like an increased need for some of the micronutrients that are consumed in those foods that are laid out in that diet. So
Okay.
it's good for them. Like it helps you supply those micronutrients. So outside of that, it's helpful. But past that, I think anytime you limit your food selection and you are successful, it's because you are being able to adhere to the diet within the core principles that make any diet successful.
Right.
Yeah. So.
So as with anything, I think maybe moderation is kind of the key.
Yeah,
And gravitating towards one school of thought or another in terms of ketogenic or the vertical diet or something like that
sure.
might help you sort of set some rough guidelines. But maybe that the sort of super strict adherence to those could be harmful long term, or what do you think?
If it's one of those things where if you can realistically think you can be eating this way in a year's time, then probably you can stick with that, right? But if
Yeah.
you think like, there's no way I can keep this up, and if you give yourself like an honest shake and thought about that, right?
Yeah.
And you can't do it, then you probably shouldn't be on that type of diet, right? And it's one of those things where ideally you get to that place over time, but people need to kind of learn their own lessons along the way, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, I want to thank Marc again. If you guys are looking to get a hold of him, he runs an excellent company called Polyhealth. Where can everybody find you?
They can email me at marc@polyhealth.ca, and
Okay.
I'd be happy to take a look at what they're doing in terms of nutrition protocols and to give them an assessment about where they're at.
Great.
Yeah.
And as well, Marc has a fantastic ebook specifically for 2-hour weight cut athletes like ourselves competing in the IPF or affiliates. So if you guys are interested in that, it is called
The Way of the Weigh-In.
Okay.
And they can find that on thewayoftheweighin.com.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, just look up Way of the Weigh-In. Marc Morris, everybody, thanks again for coming out.
Thanks for
And
having
if you
me.
guys have any questions for Marc, we are lucky enough to see each other relatively often, so we can definitely get him back on the channel. Leave those questions in the comments below. If you liked the video, give it a like. If you found it useful, maybe share it around, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks.